What's up, everybody? Today, I'm happy to have return guest Drew from the YouTube channel Drewsicology and first-time guest Brantley Vosler in the Yours Truly virtual studio today. This conversation was born when Brantley DM'd Drew and I on X. The message read, "Hey guys, it's hard to put into words how much of your conversation meant to me on a personal level. Just wanted to say thank you. It challenged me and nourished me, but it also reminded me I'm not alone. I know this might sound like hyperbole, but I don't think I've ever related to a conversation more. Discovering TLC in the first place was like that, but I couldn't believe how many specifics of what I'm daily wrestling were discussed. So thank you again." Man, what a kind and encouraging note to receive. I'm always hopeful that this work is helping someone out there. In my conversation with Drew that Brantly referenced, link will be somewhere in this and here and in the description. We went deep into Drew's Musica Apologia, and toward the end of our conversation, I asked some pointed questions to Drew about practical matters of Christian worship and music that we really just scratched the surface on. Brantly's Twitter profile says this: "My Twitter interests include church music, C.S. Lewis, and the meaning crisis. So today, I believe that we have the opportunity to take that conversation further with Brantly. If this video is helpful, give it a like. If you want to keep up with the channel, hit subscribe, and if supporting this channel makes sense for you, consider one of 3 channel membership tiers. Channel members gain access to early podcast previews and members-only content. Top tier members gain a voice to help build this little corner of the internet. So check them out. Membership link in the description." In our Twitter DM correspondence, Brantly also brought forward a Jonathan Peugeot clip that he wanted to discuss and maybe even, dare I say, critique. So we'll get into that as well. I don't know much more about Brantly other than the pithy bit he wrote on his X profile. So we'll take some time to get to know him and his background story as well. I truly believe we have the foundations for a good opportunity to practice some conversation craft here on the Yours Truly podcast today. So without any further delay, I give you Brantley Vosler and Drewsicology.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
Good morning, man. Or not Drew, Brantly. We've got Drew back. We've got Drew backstage, hanging out. But the first thing we wanted to kind of get into was, this is kind of a cold call type thing. With you, we don't know each other real well, so I wanted to ask if we'd start by you just kind of like, what makes a Brantley Vosler? What's your story? Where do you come from? What do you do? And anything in between. So yeah, man. Take it away.
So thank you. I'm really so honored to be with you, both you and Drew. Like your intro said, I just loved that conversation you guys had, and now I've watched. I've probably watched 5 or 6 conversations that you've had. Ross Bird and Annie Crawford and Ken Lowry and Drew, and I think someone else too. Anyway, they've just all been wonderful. So grateful to be here. I've never been on a podcast before, anything like that.
Well, you've got the right mic for it.
I do. Yeah. So maybe that will be where I start a little bit my story. So I have a bachelor's in audio engineering from Columbia College in Chicago. And so, I have mics laying around and I'm a worship pastor. So this is laying around the church. And so it was easy. So I look like a pro, but I got to tell you, I'm faking it. Totally faking it. No idea what I'm doing, but excited to talk to you guys. So
cool.
But yeah, I'm up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I work at a church that I love dearly called Grace Bible Church. And I'm a worship pastor here, and I've been here 10 years now.
Wow.
And so I used to have more hair when I started, and but yeah, have really loved that. And then my wife and we have 2 kids, and so living the dad life as well, trying to do that the best.
So how did you get into it? Obviously music was a big deal for you, so like with audio production, like what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. So, and I hope that this comes back a little later, but I did start, in youth group. Basically, someone said, "Hey, you should grab a guitar." So I did that whole thing, and then I was in really just one band, but we took it, pretty seriously. And man, how many years was that? But yeah, maybe 6 or 8 years was kind of doing the rock band thing. And then, yeah, somewhere in there, I did a pretty, I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this. I did a pretty like typical, I guess, if you can call it that, deconstruction thing, being in a rock band and yeah, living in Chicago. And, you know, and yeah, I wouldn't say I completely lost my faith, but man, pretty close. I hated the church. And yeah, it was not a good situation back then. But yeah, I know a lot of people have, gone through that too. And there's something with music culture there as well. It seems like extremely common if you were in a rock band, which again, yeah, I hope we can get into, even some of the forms, how forms shape you. I thought, oh, it's just rock music. Well, it's more than it's more than music. So yeah, hopefully we can get into that a little bit later too. But yeah, so I feel like I did a pretty good flyby of 10,000 feet of the last 15
So
years. But
were you raised like you said you were going to youth group, like, so you were raised Christian
yeah,
also?
so it was at a I grew up in, yeah, went to Christian school, kindergarten through all the way through. And yeah, it was a Baptist church that I grew up at. My family was really connected there. And but yeah, it was more like kind of almost non-denominational Baptist, not affiliated with SBC or anything up in Michigan. And so yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, one interesting thing about that was I really hated that place for a while, especially kind of in my, you know, yeah, I guess you might call it deconstruction days. But then I had this crazy opportunity to work there after, like, I was kind of partially healing from that, and they asked me to work there. And I really, for me, that was like a really big move of God in my life. I thought that I was going to, I don't know, fix that place or something. And it was really not, that was not what happened. I just found out that there was a lot of holy people there. They were loving me. They were gracious to me. They were helping me. And I really had so little to offer except, I led music at a youth group. And so that was my little offering. I tried to do a good job. But yeah, that was a powerful time in my life as well. And that was around when my wife and I got married as well, when I was working there. Now, like, more like 15 years ago.
So how old are you?
So I'm 37.
Okay. So, and what were what were some of the key things that kind of led you to deconstruct? What were some things that took away your faith?
We're getting into it. Yeah, man, so many things. It's still hard for me to totally parse out. But I think, something that comes up in TLC a lot, and this seemed to be a pretty core um, part of your conversation with Ken, was, the word authenticity gets thrown around. Even Charles Taylor has that book, The Age of Authenticity. I think there's something about what I wanted something authentic, and I looked to the church and it seemed kind of not authentic. I don't really know exactly why there was that mismatch. I now probably call it something more like that. They're just human people. There was certainly people that were fake, I suppose, but probably less so than me, frankly. And so, but yeah, that was a big part of it. A lot of my friends and I, we just, it all kind of all seemed fake versus, the rock music culture. And that was all real and authentic, and that religion stuff is where all the fake stuff happens. And so I mean, that's a decent description. There's a lot of stuff there too, just in my personal life. All that gets mixed in, and it's hard to know what is what. But yeah, there's of course personal things going on in my family and just in my life that were a part of it too. Things that just did not integrate and would look up at God and just go, "This you can't be real if this is happening." And so, yeah, I mean, praise God. I'm in Chicago. I met a guy who discipled young men, and I'll probably send this to him since I'm giving him a shout out. But he's actually also from Arkansas. His name's Lewis Fitch Clark. But he discipled me in Chicago and really pulled me out of a dark pit. Loved me really well, and that was kind of the end of what I call my deconstruction
So
period.
I mean, sounds like you were cynical for sure
Yeah.
about the whole project. Did you feel like there was a time that you were pretty much completely like none of it's real, like these people are fake, God's not real, like that? Did you get all the way to that place, or was it just more about the institution or something?
There was times, but it was so I wouldn't say there was a long period of like completely God's not real, but we did not talk. And yeah, I was very angry. But there was a few people around then that I did see like some light in. There's a few Christians that like I could not say that they were fake. And that was so powerful. They were like, a little beacon of light that I could see. And so, I mean, it was not complete nihilism and despair for me, but yeah, pretty close on certain days. It did, depending on when you caught me, but yeah, I don't know. It just depends on the day. I guess back then it's hard to go back there. It's been a while now. So.
You mentioned something. You just said something like being angry, and you don't have to share. But were there specific things that made you angry, or was it just the thinking everything was inauthentic? Or
yeah, I would say so. Yeah, there was some, I guess, some personal things at that time I wouldn't want to touch on, but it was, just, I guess, things that like weren't, that just seemed to not integrate with a good God. I mean, just, encounter it really, I would probably liken that part to the problem of evil was very direct, but it was that experiential type evil. Like I remember saying like, I am encountering something very evil. And there was a couple situations just in my life where it was like, wow, this is like an actually dark thing, and this cannot integrate into a good God. I have no way of making this match. And so it was just back and forth. I'd have a conversation with this person who was a good Christian, and I would feel like, oh, I'd be up, and then encounter something like, whoa, this is dark. And so just being it was very tumultuous, just thrown back and forth daily even.
So this friend that kind of discipled you, it sounds like then you were able to kind of say, okay, well, maybe I'll give this thing a try, and you went back and helped at that church, ended up meeting your wife, and you've been on that journey. So I guess, how did music, as we'll kind of get back into the music conversation, how did music, you said you started playing in a band when you were in high school and stuff. Was your family musical, or were you one of those like?
No, it's just, I'm the only one. Yeah. It's very odd. And I have a pretty large family as well. And no one else did it. And I was a sports guy through and through. And then all of a sudden it just kind of switched, and I caught the bug or something. I don't know. But yeah, around in high school, when I just started playing guitar, it was just like, I don't know, lightning, and that, my emotions are being kind of turned on at that point. Yeah, I think that was a big, emotional release then, was a part of it, but I just kind of like attached to it hard, and didn't put down a guitar for a long time, and did the songwriting thing. And yeah, I was really trying. And when I went to audio school, like the point was to record my own band. I was trying to do the whole thing. But there was a lot of vanity caught up in that as well.
As there is. Yes. Performance. That's a similar story. I was into sports, and then high school, the guitar bug and attention and everything went. And then you're just a few years younger than me, but that was like the modern worship thing was starting to hit hard, and so it was like everywhere. And
I loved one of the things you said, one of the things that related to me so deeply when I think back to that youth group kid, but you said in your conversation with Drew,
I'm going to go ahead and bring him in, by the way.
Oh, great. Hey, so, Drew.
Keep going.
Oh, I don't have Drew's mic.
Yeah, he's muted right now.
Check. All right. All right. You guys are doing great. You didn't need to bring me in.
It's all right. So one of the things about that conversation, keep going.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, I think you said you were playing a Third Day song, and classic, by the way. That just really took me back right there. But you said there was a deacon that was there who, was frustrated by it. But I loved how it seemed like you weren't like, oh, whatever, old deacon, rock music's here for good and deal with it. I loved your posture. You said something like, that was a huge source of meaning for him, that I was coming in and it seemed like me knocking over. And yeah, just that question. I think about that. That's one of the questions when I said, I think about these things all the time. I'm in a church with 80-year history, and, sometimes like blended worship will come up or something like that. But man, I just think it's so important for worship people in worship positions to care for generations. And yeah, I just think that posture was so important, to care for him. And to know that, like, if there is something lost, we should care about what's lost, and we also have to move forward together too. So anyway, I just really related to that deeply, and I found that really important, just your posture towards that person.
Well, yeah, that's a 20-year, looking back 20 years at the time, I was like, oh no, I'm doing something wrong, but but that's been part of a process of continuing to think about such things. And you're in good company if you're saying that these are the things that you think about a lot. I think you're in very good company with Drew and myself.
Yeah.
So was there some to kind of take this into the next part of the conversation, which is that how you originally reached out to Drew and myself about that conversation? Did you have a couple of other points you wanted to bring forward about that conversation that were meaningful?
Yeah. Well, I wondered, so Drew, in that, the old, what's old and what's new, just kind of launching from that, that illustration with a deacon. Drew, you had kind of said that you tried to pull in, many styles. I think that was kind of your response. And yeah, I guess just from there and what I responded to with Christian, what was when Christian said that about that deacon, what did you think?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking about everything. There's been a lot that's been said in this conversation, and there's a lot I'm just sort of synthesizing together. But the church today is very much like a quilt, where you have lots of unique people, individuals coming together, trying to knit together, and in our evangelical, we're all evangelicals in this conversation. So we have that particular background and that particular bent. And so we're like, we'll worship with anybody, like we're not, we'll have communion with you as long as you're a believer, like there's, it's very, I don't want to say laissez-faire, but it's very, we're open, we're high in openness, you could say, in that respect. There's a concept I picked up called, well, in language, in Bible translation, they talk about translating the Bible into people's heart language, which is to say, okay, like, it's one thing to have the text in English or something, but then, if you're a Spanish speaking, migrant reading the Word of God in your native language, there's just a meaning there that just directly goes into your heart. That's not being filtered through this other language. So similarly, people have rallied around the concept of a heart music, that groups of people are bound together by music, and that those sounds do similarly binding and uniting things as does language. And so when you have a quilted congregation, when you have, when you're in that non-denom situation where there's just lots of different believers, perhaps different generations, different backgrounds, then what's the one sound that unites everybody, so that's where I was coming from when I was talking about how do you program that, how do you as a worship artist, because I think what I said was congregations are being discipled together in the same direction, right? And how do you grow together as a congregation? And it's very hard to do that if you don't have those binding, if there is an agreement, right, in how we should grow together and how we worship together. And so if there's discord, right, in the liturgy, if it's, I never really liked it when I'd go home from church and, like, the other people in the car, they'd be complaining about what this, that, and the other thing that they didn't like about the singing or the song choices, or and it always just, it seemed kind of funny that we would just have like a take, like an opinion about the songs. It's just a funny element that we have in evangelical worship.
Yeah, so there's something there with music as language, and this was definitely one of the things I wanted to ask about, because so there's an important conversation to be had about how forms are not arbitrary, and if we ever do get into the Peugeot clip, that I do definitely agree. Forms are not arbitrary. Just examples like the way that death metal sounds is going to be extremely difficult to integrate into Sunday morning worship. But there is something that happens when, if someone only knows how to speak death metal. I'm going to try to do it with an extreme example. It'll be very difficult, actually. But I have seen, I know of one pastor who had like a punk rock church, and tried to do that. And it usually doesn't go very well, but even that impulse to begin translating is going to be an extremely messy process. People that have tried to translate into some of these other languages, it's very messy, but I believe that it that a lot is possible, I guess. And that we can actually translate music into in a Christian way, honestly, in many cultures that have a language that they've spoken, you might say before Christ, and
Mhm.
then the gospel gets planted as a seed, and then it's not just like, oh, and then everything good happens from there, but something begins to germinate, and something amazing might come out of that. But yeah, just that concept of translation, I wonder, yeah, how you guys think about that.
Well, the translating from like a type of genre to like a Sunday morning, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I mean, you have like with contemporary music, you have I don't know, we might go back to the Beatles, as like a bedrock, that's very, it doesn't come from Christianity, and that that influenced my language, my musical language, so much growing up listening to them. So many people go back to the Beatles. I'm this kid with a guitar, and the language that I know how to make is these types of sounds. I don't think you can just walk in to church and just make, now we have Beatles church.
No, that's
But
been a long time. That's been a long journey, but it
yeah,
has happened. Yeah.
um, but yeah, exactly, that long journey, as a possibility, um, seems, I mean, really, I'm amazed by that, how that happens and how it does change the forms. People laugh at Christian music now and say, oh, it all sounds the same. And yeah, in some sense, but it's also because of real things, even theological things, have really shaped that in our communities. We've learned to, you have to then have a conversation with that deacon. Okay, what I did wasn't great from your perspective. Now, how do we get together next Sunday and shape this thing? And it does become a specific thing. It becomes the sound that we, now have, and people complain about. um, but yeah, I guess I think it's possible.
It is possible because it's happened.
Yeah.
But I would say that conversation 25 years ago split churches.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't split churches really anymore. That happened. Like that it did, even in that situation, like the one I was growing up with, like First Baptist Church, and there was a college worship service that met at the same time in our ancillary building. And basically that college worship service became another church over time.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't able to really integrate. But then 10, 15 years later, First Baptist Church has contemporary worship on Sunday mornings. But
Then there's churches that have come to our 9 a.m. contemporary service and then come to our 11 a.m. traditional service. Like
that was what I grew up with. It's usually flipped, by the way, because the
yeah, sure, yeah.
traditional is in the morning. And yeah, there's something to that.
yes,
The smarter people wake up early.
ones without kids, the ones without kids.
Yeah.
I think. Well, yeah. So I mean, it's interesting to kind of say Beatles Church because that is what there is Beatles Church now. Like I think that's pretty interesting.
Well,
yeah, Drew, did you have any thoughts on that? I've kind of talked a few things.
I think it's interesting that rock keeps coming up, like rock per se. We're not talking about bluegrass. We're not talking about other styles of music. Like Christian, do you have a rock background? I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much the Hillsong, basically. So yeah, it's like U2 and Coldplay.
because the thing at issue that Brantly was bringing up was forms, right? That these things are real, they're not arbitrary. I didn't expect this to come up, but so I taught a lesson today. I happened to teach a jazz band at my current school as a class. Like at my previous school, it was a club. So I'm really excited that it's curriculum that I'm discussing. And so it was the first lesson. And I said, all right, kids, we're going to talk about music, like just music. And, because a lot of kids, they end up in a jazz band and then just here they are, they're just playing music. But I like to put things in context for my students. What even is jazz and where does it come from? And there's a great website called musicmap.info. And it's a map of contemporary music genres. It's a map of basically pop music, all the different subgenres of pop music. And like, it's this really impressive, almost three-dimensional interactive thing where you can zoom in, you can zoom out, and you can see it from anyways, it's really impressive. But what's striking is that right in the middle, we have hundreds of subgenres. Right in the middle is this stream of music, and it's blues, gospel, and jazz. And it's these three. And they go up to the oldest in terms of what's considered like pop music, quote unquote. Because, okay. And then before modern pop music, before recording technology, because basically what we're talking about is music that happens after recording technology and the market, right? And so like when those two come together, that's music genres, right? So what was music before recordings? How could you experience it? How could you do it? And so I sort of with my students, I said like, and then these styles of music are sort of prehistory when it comes to music, in terms of genres. And so world music, folk music, what they called utility music, which is music in context of religion or in context of, society and state functions and things like that. Anyways, so West Africa, the transatlantic slave trade, Africans brought their tradition, they brought their ancestors through their music, their rhythms, their polyrhythms, syncopation, their styles of chanting, dancing, and then this interacts with other migrant musics, Irish fiddle, right? Pub songs, right? And these start to blend and form. And I'll just skip the long story short, but like in the Black American churches, right? Gospel music, like blues is sacred music. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like that's, the blues comes out of the church and vice versa. And it's this relationship, right? And so when we're talking about today, with, like rock and roll being at church, and that's an issue. It's like, well, 100 years ago, there wasn't even rock and roll, but the roots of rock and roll were already in the church in ways that weren't trivial, in ways that weren't trying to placate, in ways that weren't trying to be winsome or whatever. It's like, this was the people. This is who they are. This is how they sing. And this church music, right? This sacred blues music being at the seed of rock and roll, being at the bedrock of what we're talking about, in the secular world. So I think there's a little bit of an element of the sacred in the roots of these contemporary pop musics. That's kind of forgotten, because I mean, like in TLC, I mean, like the African American church doesn't come up a lot, but there's a lot there that we can learn from that would benefit.
I think this might be a good time to share that Peugeot clip, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad we're going to watch it. That'd be good.
Let me see if I can MC this thing correctly. Oop, here we go.
In my church in Romania, art is not given that much importance, in my opinion. For example, music, we don't compose that much music locally here. We're just borrowing it from the States or some other composers. So, and I really think that it would bring more liveliness to the communion of and the meeting of the people here if we would have more art. And I don't know if that's a true intuition or
I think it would be. I think that the difficulty you might face is the difficulty of certain Christian traditions, which is that there are certain Christian traditions which do not view the pattern of the incarnation as being the pattern of reality and as infusing everything, as being behind the world. That Christ not only is a guy, was a man in the first century, not only was someone who came to die for your sins, but is, the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. That Christ is the pattern of everything. He's the divine logos. And so I think that because some people don't view the world that way, they tend to view the world with a scientific lens, and then impose on that world vision of this kind of secular scientific vision. They impose this story of you sinning and Adam and Eve sinning, and then Jesus coming to die and kind of fixing that problem, and now you're saved, and now the purpose of art is to get other people to be saved.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of that, there's a lack in the deep expression of the logos, which appears in scripture, which appears in the image of the temple, in the image, all the prophetic images that we see are soaking in the imagery of how the logos, how the word of God ripples through the world and manifests himself. And so I think that you're always going to kind of hit that wall a little bit, but I think there are ways around it. There are ways around it in the sense that Christianity developed an extremely powerful language of architecture, of music, and of visual language. And so, that's the place to look. That's the place to look to kind of recover it. It's just that if you're in a community that sees all of that as evil, right, and sees all of the tradition, the visual tradition and architectural tradition and musical tradition that Christians developed for 1,000 years, if they see that as evil, then you're going to struggle, because you're going to be grasping at straws, and you're going to try to make it up as you go along, and you're going to create music based on pop music and all this stuff, and it's going to have a certain weakness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry. I don't want to be harsh, but that's a difficulty. That's one of the reasons why that's why Christian art stinks most of the time. In most Christian art that's made, it's horrible. It's bad art. It's bad Christian art. It's just, it just doesn't have the depth that the ancients have, and they also don't have the depth of the secular people that they're trying to copy, because they don't understand the actual message in the form of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So if you make jazz has a form, rock and roll has a form. That form is symbolic. You can't put a baby to sleep singing rock and roll songs. And so that's because rock and roll has a form, and that form has an effect on us. And so there are some things you can't say or can't do with that form, because it has a reality of its own. It has its own body. And that's one of the things that people tend to ignore. They think it's all arbitrary, and you can just use this form or that form because it's popular, and they don't realize that if you make videos that you show in church in which you use advertisement tropes, you're using advertisement strategies to make videos to show in your church, then the effect it will have on people will be the effect that advertisement has. It won't be, and you can't do more than present, let's say, the gospel as a commodity that you need to get if you use those patterns.
Yeah, the medium is the message.
The medium, it's not just, but yes, the medium is the message. You can't completely go outside of the medium.
All right. So, thoughts?
Brantley?
So I guess, first, since this is my I've never, since I've mentioned I never been on a podcast, I do feel like I need to say I'm a huge Jonathan fan. Listen to so much of his content, really deeply encouraged me, impacted me, and specifically about forms not being arbitrary. I mean, I think that's just an incredibly important thing. So many Christian musicians have missed that. And so, I think to be fair, most fair to him. Anyway, I guess all I'm saying is it's very odd for me to come on here and say anything even but complete agreement with him, because it's just so that's so much of my posture towards him. But with that said, I do have some big questions about but to be fair to him, he says it's very difficult to do, and that I'm in complete agreement on. And when we see what's happened with contemporary music and with pop music, we're saying, yeah, it splits churches. And so it is an extremely difficult thing. But I would also I've also seen it be, it's so difficult for me to go back to, some of those youth group experiences. Christian, on your conversation with Ken Lowry, he had said, he had this really powerful experience. It seemed like maybe, around a campfire with a guitar or something like that. And it changed his life. And so there's also what I'm interested in talking about, and where I think the conversation could be taken a little further in some of these spaces, is that it might be possible, but it is going to be painful, I guess. But maybe we should maybe we need to own some of that pain, or something like that. But yeah, really, I just want to hear Drew riff on this, because I just know he has so many thoughts on this.
Thanks for playing the clip again. It's nice to hear it fresh. I was taking some notes. For me, I enter into this and I sort of bounce off of what Peugeot said there. I can't escape my own context of just being kind of like annoyed at online ortho bros on Twitter who the way they advertise orthodoxy, and the way it's presented as this de facto pure tradition, unadulterated, unbroken, going back to the apostles, and just the criticism, right, of what they would see as a very defiled is not the right word, but like, debased or
Bastardized.
evangelical. Yeah, you could say that. Tradition, so-called tradition. I think Peugeot is generous to even use the word tradition when he refers to some Christian traditions, right? Anyways, so like it's hard for me not to sort of just be defensive towards that group of people, and I also kind of wonder to what degree is Peugeot a spokesperson for orthodoxy, or is he his own person with an opinion, and his he has a brilliant like thesis that you write, the symbolic world thesis, and he does a great job harmonizing everything into that thesis. But I know Orthodox Christians who were like deep into the jazz avant-garde scene, right? And there doesn't have to be a paradox there. There doesn't have to be a disagreement there, right? So that's the first caveat I wanted to say.
The only, can I just
yeah.
mention that the only modern Orthodox music I've actually heard is like a death metal. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
The guy from Korn.
I can't remember what. Oh, I've seen some band that they use iconography and kind of like relic imagery, but they're kind of on a stage in a light show with smoke around them, and it seemed to be in an Orthodox church. And it's so yeah, it's that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's the guy from Korn who became a Christian a decade or so ago is in that.
Really?
I can't remember. I watched it probably a year or so ago. It's pretty cool. I guess my perspective on the couple of things, to circle back around to the heart music or the heart language. I had this experience where I was, full in on the modern worship, like going for it type thing, leading at church and, having a band, and we travel and do that stuff for events and camps and stuff. And when at my church, we hired a new pastor, and he was ordained as a Presbyterian. He got his MDiv from Yale, but he had grown up going to Calvary Chapel in LA, which is, it's the church. There was a Christian movie made about this recently with Kelsey Grammer. He's a pastor and he's reaching the hippies and stuff with the Jesus movement. Well, that was the church my pastor grew up in.
Wow.
And so he had this experience with, kind of that Calvary Chapel movement, modern worship and stuff in the 90s. But he kind of was like, oh, that's, passe and I can't remember what the word, cheap or something. And, okay, I want to go into be a Presbyterian and Ivy League seminary. And, and then so he applied at our church, and I was the worship leader there. And he said, when you started leading worship, Christian, like something in me reawakened. I thought I was kind of done with that stuff. And he's like, I realized it was a very deep part of who I was, the contemporary worship stuff. And, at the time I'm like, this was actually a recent conversation. He is not the pastor there anymore. And we kind of moved on, but I've thought a lot about that, and then I have like my in-laws who are in their 70s, that my mother-in-law was raised Catholic, and she's kind of longing for like historical parts of her church and the liturgy. And, she's a part of this kind of contemporary church, and she's looking for sacrament and deep meaning and, these things that were not available at the evangelical church to her, because it's like a deep part of her. And these mediums, that we talk about, the message and the medium and the power therein. The other piece I wanted to, and I'll get back around to the Peugeot thing in a second, but earlier in the conversation, when we talk about rock music, the thing that kept coming to my mind was like the idea of a rock star. Like, why do we what is that idea? Rock star. It's like, and in the medium, you kind of like, y'all have been in situations where you're like in the center of the stage, and the band and the lights and everything's, on you, and you are the star if you're the one leading it. And that's a form, and that's not arbitrary. And as a result, like, that is what people are going to be formed by, the rock star in that setting. And it's not just how cool can we make this, and it's arbitrary, because, again, we got these forms. And so you have this whole idea of the rock star and the medium, and Peugeot's, saying, we need the historical church the form needs to be modeled after the incarnation. Worship needs to be modeled after the incarnation. The setup, the worship, everything is this idea that God came down and through, Mary, and then comes forth in deliverance, and then fall and eschaton, whatever the whole thing is. I don't even know. So then there's this like sacred, deep theological aspect. And like, I think he's right in the sense that you can't take pop music and really get there, like with this sacred idea. Those things won't like make sense in a certain way. Now, can you have pop music that's about God? Yes. Can you have like telling that story? Yes. But I think that there's something about there being certain ways that take you, not that you, like I said, you're not like you said, that conversation with Ken Lowry, like that you're going to have, that you can have like personal, intimate, but I think he's talking about like the form of church, like the form of church. But then to Drew's point about like when he went on the kind of the historical journey with like the historical Black church and slavery in America, and I couldn't help but think, what is the story of the blues? Is sadness, is brokenness, is it, and this whole other image of what is church to the historical Black church is the blues. And that's the foundation, is the sadness and the brokenness of the world, and so and that's a true reality of our theology of the story. But it sounds like maybe what Peugeot is saying is that you're going to be limited by, if this is like, sometimes if we're not thinking about the whole story or something, but not that it's wrong. I don't know. Those are some of the things that came to my mind. I don't know if that
was great. Yeah, it's exactly spot on. And something that's ironic, he said these people don't take the incarnation like seriously, like in that sense. But like the people that I have encountered, okay, so ethnodoxologists. I think I brought this up in our conversation. Ethnodoxologists are they're musicians, scholars, field workers, consultants, specifically for churches in the missionized world, let's say, to help local churches navigate culture and Christian tradition, especially when it comes to the case of, okay, what if you have a group of people in China, or a group of people in India or in Africa, and they start a church, and then suddenly they stop wearing their traditional clothing and they're wearing like a coat and tie, or or something, and they need to start singing in 4-part harmony, choral harmony, hymns, and this style, this expressive mode is not interpreted necessarily as well, how do I say this? It's like, oh, if I become a Christian, then that means I also become like an American, or I also become like a European, or or something like this. And so there's been a move which is very synchronous with in Catholicism with the Vatican II sort of movement, of localizing forms of worship expression to the point of integrating these heart musics and expressive forms that communicate and that mean things to people, and this is the word, it's incarnational. It's the whole idea is that Christ is being incarnated into this culture, into these timbres, into these ways of being and moving, right?
It's moving from from above to to down. That's like the direction. And so if you some of those bedrock forms of their culture are getting heaven is coming down to that earth, but it's being changed over time, and not just like bam, now you just do this. The like wear a tie 4-part harmony thing would be like snap your fingers, this is what it looks like. But instead the incarnation, like we experience it personally, if you become a Christian, the next day it's not like, oh, now my, to use a Peterson, now my room's clean and everything just snaps into being. It actually is like this, something begins to germinate in you, and you're born again, but but it still needs to then be lived, and that can happen in many cultures over time. And I think we've seen that. I wanted to find, I might need to look for this quote. Do I have it right here? Okay, I do have it right here. So this is a Lewis quote from his essay, Is Theology Poetry? Have you guys read His
Not yet.
Theology Poetry? It's a must read, but it has what's in this that I think is so relevant and powerful is that when Christ moves down, so even in the Christmas story, where it's so abundantly clear that he has came from above with the angels down, but you might expect he goes down, and where does he go? He goes into a temple, some perfectly curated place for him to be, but he goes into a manger. He goes into this dark place, and it's not a perfect place by any means. In fact, it's just dark from there, and continues to be dark, but you see that something is happening. But anyway, let me read this Lewis quote. He says, "Have you not often felt in church, if the first lesson is some great passage, that the second lesson is somehow small by comparison, almost, if one might say so, humdrum? So it is, and so it must be. That is the humiliation of myth into fact, of God into man. What is everywhere and always, imageless and ineffable, only to be glimpsed in dream and symbol, and the acted poetry of ritual, becomes small, solid, no bigger than a man who can lie asleep in a rowing boat on the Lake of Galilee. You may say that this, after all, is still a deeper poetry. I will not contradict you. The humiliation leads to a greater glory, but the humiliation of God and the shrinking or condensation of the myth as it becomes fact are also quite real." And I hope that that type of thing has happened to me, that God has came to me, a sinner, and my temple was not clean by any means, but he began to work, and it was a humiliation for him to be associated with us, or I might even say, for a strip mall church. That's like some bad image of a church, but yeah, would Christ be willing to humiliate himself enough to enter a strip mall church? I think so, because if he's willing to, for me, it seems that some of these other low forms he would be willing to inhabit as well. Again, I'm not saying just like, oh, so any form is good, or we should keep every form. I think then it becomes the more interesting process of, okay, we're in a strip mall church. Is this the best we can have for our community? So yeah, how does that hit you guys? Especially that Lewis quote. That's a banger, in my opinion.
I just want to hit on the part about the strip mall, because I think that I liked your imagery of, in relationship to the quote, in relationship to the height of the low, and about the idea of of transformation, and that could the strip mall be transformed into something, be sanctified into something more, beautiful. Yeah, and as opposed to, we need to look at it for how it is now, and it's like, oh well, it's a strip mall right now, so it's not as beautiful, and that's all it'll ever be. Or, and instead of seeing like that it could be more, I think that's actually, I like that idea of it also entering into a story of transformation.
It seems to me that must have been how the early church, how it happened. I don't know all the places that they met, or the types of things that they built, but it seems that it didn't just snap into place. And then, Constantine is obviously such an important figure there, because he can make so many giant things happen with his power. But it still was still created from below. And I can see it from above as well. But yeah, I think that is important to keep in mind, that even these old forms that have built these beautiful things and these beautiful cultures, and this is what Jonathan says that I think is so right. They worked on it for 1,000 years. It was being, and so I think that's where a lot of Protestant evangelical types go wrong. Is it's like, oh, all that stuff is can just be like moved aside, and now we have progress. That is not my position by any means. I do think we've gone, actually, and you mentioned this in your conversation, like, where does the progress stop, or something like that. And yeah, I think that a lot more returning needs to happen in general than more progress and more freedom, and more light shows. That isn't necessarily what I think. But does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can we talk about this form idea a little bit? So, because Peugeot says, because rock has a form, and you can't put a baby to sleep with rock and roll. But then I also said earlier, it's like, but we're only talking about rock, right, as the controversial genre. We're not talking about polka, right? We're not talking about yodeling. We're not talking about even hip hop. We're not talking about, like, it's like specifically rock. So there is a form in rock that people are latching onto as this lingua franca of spiritual expression that can be where Christ can incarnate, right? And where we can ride sort of the waves, I guess would be a way we would describe it. Those patterns of sound. Like, I want to bring it back to the sound. I want to bring it back to timbre. I want to bring it back to form. Because I wonder if when Peugeot talks about form and music, I think so. He's using a very undeveloped language, because he doesn't talk about music, and he doesn't live music, and he doesn't, like like, I am a jazz musician, and then when I listen to him talk about jazz, I'm like, oh, that is so incomplete. Just what you just said there. Anyways, I feel like what he's getting at is timbre. Timbre, all music is incarnational. Like, that's part of the ontology. That's part of the phenomenology of music. It's part of just what it is and how we experience it and how we use it.
That's a great point.
That's what a music instrument is. So timbre is the incarnational element of music. A melody can transfer. You can sing a melody. You can play it on a piano. You can play it on an accordion. You can play it on a recorder, a penny whistle. One of those new instruments, those slappy. I forget what they're called. Anyways, You know what I'm talking about. But timbre, that's the element of music that's like incarnational. So let me put it to you this way: J.S. Bach, Brandenburg Concerto, I think it's number 6. There's a cadenza, which is like a solo break, basically, right at the end, right before the piece ends. And it's a harpsichord, right? We're talking 17th century here. This is a harpsichord solo that Bach composed. I urge anybody to listen to this harpsichord cadenza from the Brandenburg Concertos. It is one of the most metal things you will ever hear in terms of its tonal qualities and in terms of its rhythmic qualities. It sounds like it really is the guy's shredding. Like that's how that solo is written. So anyways, that's just a point to be had about like what are we talking about when we say form? Because
I want to speak to it. I want to speak to it because so I'm in this small kind of, we've been meeting in a home for church like for about a year. Me and my wife do a lot of the music, and a lot of the songs, like it's acoustic guitar. Sometimes we have a keyboard, and so say like my in-laws are like, they don't like rock music in church when it's done with a full band. And maybe there's like the desire for there to be, you know, like praise to be given at the end, you know, that kind of thing lends itself towards performance, right? So, but I'm playing some of the same songs. But they think that what I'm doing is more holy or more sacred or more spiritual. And this is a conversation I've been having like with myself on like, what is that? Because, and you know, we're set up differently. Like we're like on the side, and then we have like a table in the middle with like a cross, with this cross and the Bible and like maybe the elements or something. You know, a liturgist on the other side. And so the form is different, but the timbre is different, but it's the same melody and even the same rhythm. Yeah. And it translates differently.
Have you guys listened to I'm just in a big Lewis mode, which you already read that in my bio, so that's clear to everyone. But have you guys listened or read his sermon called Transposition?
I have only read The Great Divorce and like a few of the Narnia Chronicles. So anything else is gonna, and Screw Tape Letters. Anything else is no. So that's my limit right there.
Drew, did I see you shake your head? You've not.
I have not. Okay. That sounds great though.
So he talks about, you know, how an orchestra can and it's a little bit in conversation with what symbolism, where symbolism ends and where it becomes sacramental instead of just symbolic. But so he uses the example of you know, sometimes we just think of transposition as, okay, it's in C, and then we're just going to transpose it into D. But he talks about transposition in a piece that's made for an orchestra can be dumbed down to just the piano, and the melodies are there, and you notice that it's different, but yet there's something, there's a lot that is the same. You guys both would love this sermon. I mean, it is incredible and so important, I think, to understand symbolism and what's sacramental. But anyway, I wonder how that hits you, Drew, especially in terms of timbre. You know, a piano is such a that is the different thing. It is a different timbre than the orchestra, but yet there's something that's kept, and something core that's kept. And someone had to work out, you know, okay, the flutes do this, here. And so then I need to take that and and okay, the flutes will be in this range of the piano, and you try to get it close, and that matters, but you also know that you can't get it exactly close with the tools that you have. And so it seems like that's happening to a lot of us, where we're wanting more forms that might feel more holy or more sacred, but we've been given a guitar that makes these types of sounds, and now we're doing this work of translation from these really high things that seem like, oh God, this is for God, I need to do this really important, and yeah, how does that hit you? That it's a transposition that's happening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We would call it reorchestrating or rearranging a piece. Like I'm even doing that right now. I'm writing. I'm arranging an Arabic song. It's a Tunisian song. It's like an old 1950s, like sort of like Tunisian popular song, and I'm arranging it for a school band and a school choir. And there's a lot that I'm trying to keep to honor the origin, but there's a lot that's like just changed in the process, right? By virtue of it being tuned into these instruments, by virtue of you hearing brass and woodwinds rather than an oud and a kanun zither instrument and the Arab tambourine. When Christian was talking, I was reminded of like how like Hillsong or whoever will release like an original album that's like with all the digital effects and stuff, and then they'll put out this is the acoustic set, right? It's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
So and then me personally, I don't know how other people feel, but like I just only like the acoustic set. Like if I'm going to worship, that's the one I go to.
Yeah.
If it's overly produced with a lot of effects going on, like for me, that's just a different sort of thing. But then also, when you were talking about the piano there, Brantly, like the piano was invented to be a technology of one person can do those many roles. You can be the accompaniment, you can be the melody player, you can be the harmonizer, you can be the rhythm generator, and you can even sing all simultaneously. And that's why it was such a marketable instrument. And then when they invented, like you could actually play soft and loud, that was like this mind-blowing experience, and then and then it was mass produced. And then once the middle class emerged, then it became like everybody had a piano at home. That was your radio, that was your TV, that was like that was the big family purchase, was having a piano at home. Today, so in that process, right, you lose the flutes and the violins and all of the orchestral effects, but you keep the music, whatever we're talking about when we keep the music. But then today, it's sort of inverted, or it's going the other direction, where now we can have one person at a laptop and put in not just all of the orchestral effects, but invent so many infinite kinds of timbres and sounds. And so now this is bringing us back into the electronic conversation of form and meaning, and what do these sounds mean? Because what does it mean? What does it mean if I'm worshiping to music where none of the timbres are embodied in a real object?
Yeah, I want to speak to that. So I was, before I got out of ministry, was fired. Back 2015, 2014, I was using the beginnings of what people use now called multi-tracks, which it's like you get the studio stems and you can turn part of them up and part of them down. Like there's a guitar part that you don't have, you can have that in the mix now. In Brantly, you're probably familiar with all this stuff, but like you can add the bass, or you don't have a bass player at some, put the bass in. And I was really conscious of, okay, yeah, I could have the pro stem for this guitar lead for this song, but I was like, but I have a guitar player. He can't play it as good as the player for that band, but he needs to be the one playing it. And then I think in time, some of that, after my time, it's like, oh no, we want the professional sound on that instead of the person sound on that. And that was, caused some sadness, I guess you could say. But, there's different things about the idea of wanting something to be, this is a trigger word for me, excellent but at what cost of people. You can get this mechanized, this technologized thing that plays the song to the, the millisecond on the click track with the professionally EQ'd and produced sounds. Or you could have the human version, the non-professional version. And which one is more excellent? What is the, more excellent way? And so I think that's a piece of it that is being contended with now more. And I've walked back a lot from that in my own personal opinions about what it means to do that together with people and what's important. But I think that is the right question, is that Drew's kind of bringing out with the technologization of forms. And there's something too, also, I had a conversation with Matt Hylam, who's a producer, and I had it on here and encourage y'all to go back and listen to it. But he does everything in the box. Like he does all his music by himself in a studio.
Yeah, I listened to that one. That was great.
And so but towards the end, I was like, do you want to do stuff with people? He's like, yeah, I would actually want, like, the relationality of music is also such a big part. And for me, getting into rock music, the idea of being in a rock band was more important than like me as an artist making something myself. I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to do this thing with a group of brothers, and they could do so much more than I could as myself. It's like I'm a mediocre musician, and you have these specialists, and it makes the whole thing come up, and you're there's the communication and all that kind of thing. So I think a lot is lost that way, and even to the point of like, oh, we can get like that idea of the piano is kind of like the music in the box type thing that Drew was talking about, like to the producer being able to do everything digitally with, a pad and a keyboard and his own guitar or whatever, or be able to do it by yourself on a piano. Certain things are lost on what it means. Like music, I think is almost inherently relational. So I don't know. That's some of the thoughts I wanted to throw in on that.
Yeah. So hopefully this doesn't change things too much, where you were headed with that. But I also thought of another problem with or difficulty, and I mean that kind of as something to embrace in this case, but that a lot of people do not understand with Christian music and church music is those relationships also have a holiness element to it. They have, when you communicate with that guitar player, what I liked about when you said there was some sadness there, those relationships, they're very complex, and they need we are called not just to make music in church, but we know that there's actually something way more at stake in that. We're supposed to be holy together first, and loving God with all our heart, soul, and mind. That's like our first, and then we have to do some of these other things together. But there really is real sacrifice for the music. So another option might be, even before the track, would be, hey, I have a bass player who's very good, but is not a Christian. A lot of churches said we need to have that bass player, even though, he's doing something completely else during the week. And you start to see that, no, actually you do need to sacrifice musical quality in the direction of holiness. And that's a very, very good thing, and is really the real work. But and this might even be like, I might continue to, I'm really interested in this like low church versus high church conversation here, because if we almost should have, oh man, how do I want to say this? Maybe I'll say it some way that it sounds controversial maybe at first, but I'm not sure I totally mean it. But but the concept is a low church that's holy, but does not doesn't have the bells and whistles and the sounds and doesn't look pretty, but is holy before God. That is a better church. People that are holy before God, rather than the excellent forms, you might say. So yeah, how does that hit you guys?
I want to jump in again real quick, but that for me, it has to do with this idea that we're trying to create transcendent experience, and that becomes the telos. That becomes the ultimate goal, is the creation of transcendent experiences for individuals. Individuals come to our church and they have a transcendent experience because that professional bass player, that professional singer, that professional drummer know how to do it. They know how. They are so good at their craft that they can create a transcendent. I mean, they transcend our ability to even come close to that musically. And when you enter into that, you transcend, the normal musical experience of the folk musical experience. Now you can, that can be done with folk artists can transcend, but my point being that, and that we have sacrificed, integrity or character or holiness, whatever the word, for the sake of being able to offer people a transcendent experience. And I think that's also where, now, can you have a transcendent experience and the music not be great because of other things? I think so. But because music's not the only art form that affords that. And so, but in modern contemporary evangelical churches, music is kind of the vehicle for transcendence. So I think that's where part of the conversation with Jonathan Peugeot being a actual artist, carving artist, that like his sensibilities are aimed at like the space that you inhabit, which is why he's drawn to these temples, these sanctuaries that are incredible, and what the depth of what they're offering him. But and I think we have a lot to learn, in our quote unquote iconoclastic Protestant settings. And I think part of the ideas of these transcendent light shows and stuff are part of that, and seeking those types of things. So there's a lot going on there, and I think that navigating these tensions and these poles and pulls is kind of the future of being thoughtful, because I think we, as we mature, this rock form matures in a certain way, we have to be able to critique it, and so anyways, and look to our history. And Drew, what do you got?
I mean, I don't want to linger on that. That was like the things that are being said right now, like in the last 5 minutes, we're touching this thing. It's like we're right at the boundary of what can be said on this topic, and we're just sort of like experimenting now. And but that is the like, how do I say this? We're trying to put words to the zeitgeist. We're trying to put words to this thing that's really hard to describe, because like my head, as someone who also does worship, like my head went to, well, when I play this chord pattern and not that chord pattern, like this is going to onset this experience for, you know, the participant, like, and when you, yeah, and I remember saying, Christian, the first time we talked about the power of music should not be underappreciated. It should be respected. It should not be taken advantage of.
You guys use the word coercive at some point.
Coercive. Yeah, very true. Yes. And I think to Brantly's point, I think when you do, I think the way, I love how you put it, sacrifice musical quality in the direction of holiness. That there is that, well, we need to coerce our congregation into this transcendent experience, which is why we need that bass player, right? We need to, we can pay him for his time, to come in and play, things like that. Anyways, I don't have anything to add to that piece, but I thought it was really important, I think, to point out that, just to linger right there, because that's such an interesting thing. Another topic related to it is, okay, so where is the space for these forms that we're talking about? Because, Brantly was talking about low church, holy, sanctified. Okay, well, how low can we go?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And, because when Peugeot, again, I'm going to echo Brantly, like, all due respect to Peugeot, love the guy. Like, I've been blessed so much by his work and stuff, but like, this is something to discuss. So like, when he says, Christ is the pattern, like he just says that, as if to say by implication that necessitates what Byzantine chant? Like, what does that, what's the entailment? What's the aesthetic entailment of that? And we're not just talking about a Sunday morning. We're not just talking about liturgy. He's going after Christian art broadly, right? Where in Christian art is there space for rock and roll, for jazz, for these forms, because they do speak to real, authentic experiences. We were talking about rock and authenticity at the beginning of this conversation. Like, what about rock is authentic? Like, why is that word attached to that particular style of music? I think that has something to do with why we're talking about rock as the avatar for contemporary Christian music. If liturgy is the center, okay, then at the periphery, what's acceptable? Because he'll talk about the medieval period of, there were these folk dances and there were these folk songs and things like that. Well, there was a cultural tension between the music out in the folk sphere, with the hurdy-gurdy, and like, if you look at paintings, like, from the 1500s of depictions of musicians, and it's like peasant wedding parties and things like that, and and there's lots of drinking, and it's very it's very carnal in a lot of ways. Like, is that sanctified? Like is Peugeot down with that? And why is not, why couldn't these modern forms be sort of just a modern expression of that same sort of carnal sort of, let me just use a different analogy. Michael Spitzer is a musicologist. He wrote a book called The Musical Human. And in that book, he juxtaposed the music of the temple and the music of the cave. and these are both scenes of sacred space. These are both places where sacred things happen.
Another high and low.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's another version of that high and low sort of idea. So I guess the question is, how low can you go in our low churching?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things which is like you've spoken with Neil deGrasse, Drew, as well. Professional rock, opera, and even at Symbolic World that I got to attend, huge rock concert on Friday night, and then a bunch of people went to liturgy on Sunday, both within the context of these things. And I think that's, for me, that's kind of, there was the temptation, like so many things in the 50s and 60s, and even to that point, we talked about the Jesus movement, Calvary Chapel, and the hippies, and there was like, no, we can't, the fringes, no, they're just wrong. Instead of saying, no, there's something here, obviously. And if you say it's just wrong, then you get Kiss and the whole movement, of what sex, drugs, and rock and roll, instead of being like, well, how do we kind of connect these things? And then the whole thing kind of integrates. And now, like, you don't start a church, you don't plant a Baptist church with hymns. You don't do that anymore. That's just not what's done. You don't plan maybe I'm just saying that's now where we're at. And with you go out and you rustle up a good rock musician to help get this thing going, with your preacher. And so I think that's kind of interesting. The other piece I wanted to say on it is this idea, where's the tension is that, I do think that there's a tension. There is a temptation to try to compete with the cave from the temple, where it's like, we want, okay, well, let's bring the folk in. And I think that's what we see now to certain degrees, is the church is not the church. Parts of the church are trying more to compete, or whatever the word might be, transpose with, like, can we out Taylor Swift? And that was kind of Peugeot's point on, you're not going to be able to do that if that's what your goal.
That was a great point. That was a really good point, I think.
If that's what your goal is, to try to be, and you just can't do her $1 billion tour. You can't do that. People try and they get close, and there's some pretty good Sunday morning shows, and I think this is where, to even take it back to another part in the conversation with the Lewis essay sermon about, where I can't remember, something meets the sacrament, is that when music is your sacrament, and that is for the most part the low church, we've made music the sacrament, that this is where heaven meets earth. This is the only place heaven meets earth. I argue that it is not, it can't bear that weight by itself. And that's why the low and the high church, you're trying to get it to do more, to do so many things. You're trying to get music to do so many things in worship if you've got 4 songs and a TED Talk. And that's where I would say something like that, it can point to something else. It will point then to a type of sacramental incarnation, I guess you could say, in it, instead of it trying to be the sacramental incarnation in worship. And that would be my my affinity for the high church, having these other pieces that are available for that. But it hasn't been done, very well on all these pieces playing together. Anyways.
Well, if I could just add on to that, like, I think even a broader notion of music, because as you just said, 4 songs in a TED Talk. I love that. A mass doesn't just have songs. In fact, songs are interstitial elements throughout a mass, but like chant is throughout, right? And if you expand music into the three levels of musica instrumentalis, musica humana, musica mundana of Boethius, like whether or not it's silent, or whether or not it's sounded, or whether or not it's intoned, or whether or not it's spoken, it's arranged. It is music. It's harmonia. It's on a much broader level, and so you don't need to like jam pack and oversaturate, I guess might be a word, with song. And what's interesting to me is, this is an aside, like, because we're supposed to be bashing Peugeot orthodoxy over here, but the worship wars, hymn stuff, it's like pick a century. You're always going to be whatever was the hottest thing. You know what I mean? Like Amazing Grace was like, that was a hot, top 50 chart, when it first, it was like just Protestant hymnody is itself a low church like sort of phenomenon, because it's using song forms and song cycles and song and melodies and all that stuff that was used in secular song, that was used in even in drinking songs and things like that. So I that's a high horse of mine, of just like, it's like you're just moving the date back a little bit, but that in its day that was still like CCM, like how you were doing it, because it was very low church.
And even to the point of a church that some of their forms were maybe like tried to conserve, say, at 1,000 years of the church. Okay, we're just going to try to stop at 1,000 years, But even then, that you're talking about 1,000 years. So,
well, and the other thing is like, if we're talking, I'm not. This is out of my area of specialty expertise, but like we had the Jewish synagogue service, predated by the temple service, right? That which is happening in the synagogue, maybe you who went to seminary, if any of you are on the call, can help me with this. The synagogue liturgy is the template for the Christian liturgy. Okay, that much I'm pretty confident in saying. They would chant the Torah, right, using certain modes and certain styles and certain ways of expressing things, and then the first Christians continue in that template, right? We know that the apostles, they sang the Psalms with Christ around the Last Supper. We have to assume that for the remainder of their lives, like we know in the book of Acts, that they continued meeting in the temples, in the temple courts, and they and then there's what I've just learned from history, is that there is this sort of schism that happens that no one really talks about. Catholics and Orthodox seem to talk about the first schism as happening in the 11th century, but I think maybe the first historical schism was like Jewish believers and Gentile believers.
Yeah.
And
a couple of books of the Bible about that tension.
And even post AD 70, like the Romanization, right, of whatever had been happening. Anyways, so when we talk about, we have this traditional liturgy, it's rooted in tradition and it goes back to the apostles. It's like, does it? Is that how they did it? I don't think so. And if we heard the Psalms chanted the way they originally chanted them, they would be using different scales, different rhythms. I don't know if we'd even like it. It's like,
different. I think especially the different language thing would be the biggest barrier, especially for a non-educated person, when you realize that the Gentiles are being grafted in and the gospel is spreading. If it can't scaled down to an uneducated person who speaks a different language, right there you have the problem of, okay, we need to like, I could imagine, this is kind of an interesting exercise, being converted that long ago, and you don't have a marketplace to go to of, is there Christian music online for me? Like there's none of that, but I have a culture that I was born into, and this thing happened to me. Like I encountered the gospel, I encountered Christ. Imagine that person being a musician, and like, what does their next day look like? What does their next few decades look like? My suspicion is they will take the little that they do know and that they are, the language that they have, and they will begin to try to work with God and their church on that project, and something amazing will be born out of that. And all those, even architectural forms, when you look all around Europe and the Middle East, how many even different ones of that there are through the ages. There's architects that have certain gifts and certain languages and ways of making, and they had to do that same project, but it didn't turn out cookie cutter. Praise God, it didn't turn out cookie cutter, because we can go to these places and say, wow, like look at what all of these people built unto God.
This brought up something. So when I was at Symbolic World, I got to go on a tour of the local cathedral with Jonathan Peugeot as a tour guide, talking about the different parts of the church. And
I'm jealous.
I have it on video on my is it? Yeah, I have a video of it on my channel buried somewhere. And one of the interesting things it's making me think of, because it goes all the way back to the hiring the bass player that's not a Christian, and even to then Peugeot's bringing in these other forms, or what he is more gracious than the typical, maybe whatever orthobro cultures out there. He is more gracious, because what he actually said was that if you look at these forms, and he was noting the different icons in the stained glass as you were walking through the first part of the sanctuary, he's like, this, you can tell it's not Greek or Orthodox, because it looks actually maybe more Catholic, or it looks more X, Y, and he's pointing out some points. And the actual tour guide person that is from the area that was with him said, actually, these stained glass were made by a company out of Atlanta or out of Georgia, and it was just a family company. They weren't even artists, or they weren't Christians or something. Drew's feeling vindicated right now. And they were, a stained glass company that just came in, and they were just, using whatever, make it like the Catholic Church down the road or something. It was not this glorious these people with their, they were making a Orthodox type church is what they were making with. And so, and that was one piece. There was other art they brought in people to actually paint different parts of it. But I think that that part about the bass player is like, we just got this company out of Georgia to come build our stained glass. We didn't have, and there's reasons for it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of an interesting how that.
Or how about the who produced the grape juice you're using for communion, right? Or who built your sound system, who installed it in your church? Like, what companies, like, you know what I mean? Like, are we just gonna expect that these are Christians all the way top to bottom,
Yeah. So, yeah, and
but there is like, so there is the possibility, or like we can negotiate those things in real time. And I think that's amazing that we can do so many small things to God. And we can mess them up all the time, but it's possible to make, a cracker unto God for communion. Like, and I think that the person who's in charge of that or running that company, I do hope they're Christians, and I hope they make it unto God. But we should realize that it's not pure. I think this is like one of the points we're kind of latching onto, is that it's not pure all the way up and down. And that is not that we should leave it there and say, oh, it's not pure, therefore it's fake. And I mean, I think that in my own story, some of that I think is what's going on with a deconstruction movement, is realizing, oh, I thought this church was supposed to be pure. I realize it's not, and so I'm out. I think you can actually, build a church towards God in tons of small ways and big ways too. The other one quick problem I wanted to mention, with some of the low church, high church stuff, is that you will also have very talented people come to Christ, and they will be good at, what we called negatively as coercion. But we will have an amazing bass player who also loves God. And then they should play their bass, or there's something here about offering our first fruits. I think like we should, at all levels, low and high, if we find ourselves in Constantine's position, well, the empire is offered unto God, if that's where we find ourselves, way up at the top. But if we don't, and it's like, I just have these 6 strings and my house church, well, offer that unto God and use it for his glory and good. There is ways all the way up and down. I mean, I think that's just amazing. Praise God that he might be able to use big and small things.
Something you said there, Brantly, made me think about when Peugeot said in the clip, like, I wrote it down. Just bad Christian art. Like when he was talking about bad Christian art, he's like, well, in the medieval era, it was like, they're making this awesome stuff. I'm paraphrasing, but like the whole idea of everything was done at the highest possible level that it could be, between architecture, music, right? The developments of the church were so sophisticated and leading, right, in those artistic arenas. Well, one thing that's different is, like you just said, we offer the empire, right, in the service of these kinds of things. I mean, they enjoyed a good run,
Christendom.
Exactly, like
it's a very powerful thing.
Where empire or just the monarchy, or like church and state, right? Like that combination. So you didn't need to hire a Christian painter to make this mural or something like that. It was just like, the king says, we're going to build the biggest friggin' church that we have ever had in this village, and that's what we're going to make, and it's going to be grand, and it's going to be huge, right? And and musically, so like music notation, like writing music notes, in staff notation, that is a development of the church. That's 1,000 years ago. That was developed so that monks could preserve the way they were chanting, the Gregorian chant. The funding for all that, like how do you fund that? And it's like, so anyways, high church, low church, like avenue streams, who's paying for things, like on some basic level, like there's there's a reason, right, why we have bad Christian art, right? And it's like who's doing the public funding for things? Meanwhile, it's like we just visited, different parts of Europe, and it's like there are still like publicly funded, huge works, whether it's a church or whether it's a anyways, it's a different economic system, right, than what Peugeot was talking about.
And what we have in the West now. Yeah.
So
guys, we're coming up on time. So I was wondering, and which is hard to believe, but it's
so fun.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of give both of you guys kind of a last word, kind of whatever, you're thinking about, what this is meaning for you or anything like that. So I don't know.
Yeah. I'll just use that time to just respond to what Drew said. And we'll have to have Drew will offline. We'll need to pick back up on that, because I think that's such an interesting point. The other thing is that we preserve these really precious things over time, and I'm so glad that we have. But what we forget is the small, the person who just made a song in their house, just that at that same period of time, that might not have been the best art. We didn't preserve, some teenager's worship song. What I want to encourage people, especially young people, if they're listening to this, that you can pray a song to God in your bedroom, and it might not be, preserved in the history books. But that is like what we are called to day to day. And who knows what that might turn into? Maybe it will be turned into, maybe you're amazingly talented and what you write will be, preserved for forever and ever. But, just today we can offer what we have, if it's big or small.
Thanks, Brantly. Drew, you got anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, I think that was great.
All right, guys. Well, thank y'all both for making this happen. Drew is literally halfway across the world on a time zone. And so it's getting late over there, and our day's moving on. And I appreciate both you guys coming on.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
This was fruitful, I believe. And it was a lot of fun to interface with the corner of the internet, like with Jonathan Peugeot, and put some Protestant evangelical voices to the conversation. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah. Till next time.
Thanks, Christian.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and staying with us until the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection are truly meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and believe that these discussions bring real value to your life, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Your feedback and interaction are crucial in making this space even more meaningful. Also, I've opened up channel memberships on YouTube. By joining, we can foster a stronger community of connection and support the continuation of more conversation craft. Membership is set up to foster this in 3 ways. Level 1, connect via members-only community posts for channel feedback, behind-the-scenes moments, and supportive membership branding on comments. In addition, Level 2, get to watch podcasts a week before they air, along with other unique members-only videos. At Level 3, join scheduled monthly focused small group discussions with other kindred spirits from all over the world. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. Together, we can cultivate meaningful, supportive digital community right here in this little corner of the internet. We'll see you next time.